In today's video for Poker 101 course, we're going to talk about the two specific reasons for betting in poker. So if you don't know what they are, stay tuned because that's what we're going to talk about today. Hey guys, welcome to today's video for Poker 101 course. If you guys don't know who I am, my name is Alton Harden. I'm the founder of MicroGrinder Poker School and this YouTube channel, and we're all about turning beginning and struggling poker players into solid winning poker players through sound poker fundamentals. So if you guys are new to our YouTube channel, consider hitting that subscribe button down there and subscribing so you get updates to all of our latest videos. And also, if you guys are interested in picking up a free copy of my Poker Fundamentals ebook, check our description down below. You can sign up for our free 6 Steps of Profitable Poker course, and you'll get a free PDF version of that book. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into today's video. In today's lecture for Poker 101 course, we're going to talk about the reasons to bet in poker. And there's really only two primary reasons to bet in poker. The first one is value betting, and the second one is bluffing / semi-bluffing. Now, there's a wide array of other reasons to bet in poker, and some of them are valid, some of them aren't valid, and we're going to talk about those as well. But first, we're going to talk about value betting, so let's talk about that right now. So let's talk about value betting. So a lot of people understand the concept of betting the best hand, but they don't truly understand the concept of value betting. There's two components to value betting. The first one is you have the best hand or you think you have the best hand, and the second one is people are going to call with worse hands. So if people don't call with worse hands, if they fold, there's no value to be had. There's no value betting occurring. So when we're looking to bet the best hand, we need to ask ourselves, do we get value from betting here? Or does it make sense to slow play instead and induce bluffs or get people to call when we do a delayed c-bet when they think that a weaker hand is good? So you need to take this information into consideration before you value bet. And to give you a couple of quick examples, let's talk about a dry board texture example and a wet coordinated board texture as an example. So for example, first example, we'll do a dry board texture. Let's say you have pocket kings, you open under the gun, you get a call from middle position, everybody folds, and the flop comes king, 7, deuce, rainbow. This is an amazing flop for you, right? You flop top set, it's super dry board texture, there's really no draws, you can't get sucked out on. But the question is here, what's the best way to get value? It's hard for your opponent to have a king in their range because you block so many of the combos of them, and betting here is surely going to make him fold. So is value betting here, does it make sense on such a dry board texture, or does it make sense to check to induce bluffs, or check to allow your opponent to catch up? Maybe a queen or jack or an ace comes on the turn, or maybe even something like a 9 or a 10 comes and they make middle set. And then you allow them to catch up, or you allow them to think that their second best hand is good, or you allow them to bluff. So in this situation, value betting actually doesn't make sense from a value perspective. There's less value to be had from value betting versus if we check and try to induce a bluff, or allow your opponent to think that a second best hand is good, or to allow them to catch up on the turn. So in that situation, value betting doesn't make sense with the best hand. Now let's flip it around. Let's do an entirely different scenario. Let's say that you have king queen suited under the gun and it flops ace jack 10 with 2 spades. Let's say that your king queen is of hearts, and so you don't block any of the spade flush draws. Well, you flopped the nut straight draw, but it's likely that your opponent could have a pair of aces. It's likely they could have a pair plus a straight draw. It's likely they could have a pair plus a flush draw, or even a flush draw, or even a straight draw, a combination of those two. So if we flip it around and we make it a much more coordinated board texture with tons of draws and overcards, then it makes a lot more sense to bet for value here because your opponents are going to call with worse made hands and they're going to call with a lot of drawing hands here. So the question that you have to ask yourself here is if I bet with the best hand, do I get value? It's a clear yes. Most of the time you get value. So that's the difference of just looking at betting the best hand or looking at if you can get value or not with the best hand. Now we can take value betting a step further, and we can talk about it from the perspective of thick value and thin value. Thick value would be an example of the top set of kings, where you just have the board crushed, your opponent can't beat you. Thin value is a different concept where, let's say, you have middle pair, or you have bottom pair, or you have top pair with a terrible kicker, and you get down to the river, and people play the hand very passively. You think that your opponent's going to call you with the worst hand, and you think they're going to call you a high enough frequency where over the long run this is going to be a profitable play, but you expect to lose sometimes, and that's thin value. That's typically betting the river with a mediocre hand where you think you win enough of the time to make it marginally profitable, where over the long run it helps boost up your win rate a little bit. So that's thin value and that's thick value. And that's the concept of betting for value. So when you're thinking about betting the best hand, always think about number one, thick value or thin value, and if you can get value or if you can't get value with your hand, and if it makes a lot more sense to slow play or to fast play your hand. So that's value. Now let's talk about bluffing and semi-bluffing. So the second primary reason for betting in poker is simply bluffing and semi-bluffing, and this should be a shorter discussion than value betting because this one is just a lot more basic. So bluffing, right? It's fairly basic. It's straightforward. We have a hand that has little to no expectation of winning the hand if it goes to showdown. We are guaranteed probably 99% that if it goes to showdown, we're going to lose. So we bet to try to make our opponent fold a better hand. Now there's a lot of dynamics that go into determining what makes a good bluff and what doesn't make a good bluff, but we're not going to talk about that stuff right now. We're just going to talk about what it is. So when we're bluffing, we want to get our opponent to fold a better hand by bluffing pre-flop or post-flop, and post-flop we can bluff 1 streets all the way down to 3 streets, all the way down to the river. Now, in addition to bluffing, there's semi-bluffing, and then it gets a bit more complicated. So when we're semi-bluffing, we're bluffing for 2 different reasons when we're semi-bluffing. So when we're semi-bluffing, we're bluffing with a draw, and we have 2 different reasons for our bets. The first reason, number 1, is that we're utilizing fold equity. If we think our opponents are going to fold a decent frequency on the time, we're semi-bluffing to get them to fold better hands. And so that's the primary reason. The secondary reason is that if by chance we end up hitting our draw, which hopefully we do, we're building a pot for when we hit our draw so we can get more money in on the turn or the river when we hit it. So it's a combination of 2 different factors, utilizing fold equity and potentially making the best hand and building the pot to make the best hand. And that's what semi-bluffing is. So we're fine if our opponent folds. Let's say our opponent folds 90% of the time when we semi-bluff, or let's say they fold 100% of the time when we semi-bluff. Well, then we're perfectly happy that they fold because we're betting the best hand. We're betting the worst hand a majority of the time. So if they fold, that's a good result for us. Now on the flip side, if they don't fold that often and we expect to hit our draws a lot, then we're fine with that as well because we're building the pot for when we hit a draw where we're going to extract a lot of value on the turn or the river. So that's the concept of bluffing and semi-bluffing. Now I want to talk about other reasons for betting in poker, and I'm going to call these secondary reasons. Some of them make sense from a theoretical perspective, and other ones really don't make sense in 2017. So let's talk about those right now. So now that we've talked about our 2 primary reasons for betting in poker, let's talk about some secondary reasons. And the unique thing about secondary reasons, when we talk about valid secondary reasons, they actually fall within the category of our primary reasons. And this will make a lot more sense as we go through it. So we're going to talk about 2 secondary reasons. The first one is betting for protection, and the second one is getting our opponent to fold their equity share of the hand. So you're going to see in a lot of training videos, you're going to hear me say, well, I'm betting for value and protection. Well, when we're talking about betting for protection, protection bets are usually in the form of a thin value bet where we think we have the best hand, but we hate a lot of turn cards and river cards that are going to improve our opponent to allow them to make a better hand than us. Sometimes we're going to be value betting with a very good value hand. Other times it's going to be a very thin value bet. Now, majority of the time, it's going to be in the form of a thin value bet, but on a really wet board texture, it's actually going to be a really thick value bet. So, for example, we flop the nut straight with that example that we did before with the king-queen, but there's a flush draw, there's a straight draw, there's a lot of different draws where we're betting for protection as well. So we're protecting our hand versus those draws. We're making our opponent pay to suck out on us. But when we talk about those in general, they're value bets. And it's typically going to be a thick value bet or a thin value bet, but a majority of the time when we're in these situations where we're betting with second pair, so for example, pair of 8s on a 10-7 deuce rainbow board, well, we have a mediocre hand, so it's going to be a thin value bet. So any of the times where you're betting with top pair with a weak kicker or medium pair or third best pair, it's going to be in the form of a thin value bet. Now, sometimes this can actually be in the form of a bluff, you just don't know it. So let's say that we're betting third pair, but we don't know that we're actually making our opponent fold second best pair. It's in the form of a bluff. So we're betting for protection when we don't even know we're making our opponent fold the best hand. Now, if we kind of tweak this around a little bit and we look at it in terms of our opponent sucking out, we're also getting our opponent to fold their equity share of a hand. So if we put any particular hand in an Equilab, we can compute our equity chance of winning the hand on the flop and our opponent's chance as well. So let's say that we're 60% favorite on the flop, but our opponent has a 40% chance of winning the hand by the river if we allow them to get to the river. So when we're betting for protection, sometimes we're actually betting to get them to fold their equity share, and in fact, we are getting them to fold their equity share. That's actually the secondary goal of betting for protection, because if they have a hand such as a backdoor flush draw, or flush draw, or straight draw, or combo draw, or even just 2 overcards or 1 overcard, if we play our hand too passively, we allow them the potential to catch up and make the best hand. And so when we're betting for protection, we're also betting to allow them to fold their equity share of the pot and give it up and give it to us. So it's a combination of those two. And like I said, sometimes when you're betting for protection, you're betting to get your opponent to fold their equity share of the hand. Sometimes you're value betting, and sometimes unknowingly you're bluffing. And other times you actually know that you're bluffing. So those are the reasons that I think are valid reasons that are secondary reasons for betting in poker. Now let's talk about some reasons that I don't think are valid in 2017 from a theoretical perspective. Okay, so now that we've talked about our primary reasons for betting in poker and our valid secondary reasons for betting in poker, let's talk about some reasons that I've actually heard of and seen in the past that I really don't think are valid. And I actually have some notes down on the screen, so I'm going to talk about them right now. So an example would be, I'm pretty sure I have the best hand, so I'm betting. I'm betting to see where I'm at. I'm betting for information. I'm betting so I don't get sucked out on. I'm betting my hand. So when we look at these, when people are looking at these reasons, they're talking about these reasons to bet, they somewhat relate to the reasons I talked about earlier, but they're not really fully flushed out. So when we talk about I'm betting the best hand, again, this kind of goes with value betting, but they're not really thinking about all the criteria that goes into determining whether we should value bet or not. I'm betting so I don't get sucked out on. This kind of goes into the same spectrum of betting for protection. But the question is, when they say they're betting so they don't get sucked out on, are they saying that they're value betting? Or are they saying that they're protection betting with a weaker hand? So we really don't know. But I don't think it's really flushed out 100% in from their mind, their perspective. Another one is, I'm betting to see where I'm at, or I'm betting for information. So the pro bet, right? We're betting for information to see where we are at in the hand versus our opponent. Now, this is something that you actually, I heard a lot about, back in the Moneymaker days and on ESPN, and a lot of people talk about pro betting and betting for information and betting to see where you're at, putting a bet out there to see how your opponent responds so you can put them on a range so you can see where your hand is compared to them. Now, in terms of modern poker theory and understanding ranges, understanding calling ranges, understanding uncapped ranges where they're open razor, understanding how ranges connect with boards, and using tools like Equilab and equity calculators and Flopzilla, and also using tools such as HUD stats as well, and player tendencies and all that, we can use all that information instead to determine where we're at in a hand. It doesn't make sense just to bet to put money out there to see if our opponent's going to call or fold or raise. Because if we're doing that, does it really give us that much information? Or does it make a lot more sense to utilize our skill set as a poker player to determine where we think they're at in the first place, if they have a capped range or an uncapped range, and how the board connects with their range based upon our notes, our reads, and our HUD stats on our opponents? So when we're talking about betting for information as a pro bet to see where we're at, it just doesn't make that much sense, because you're kind of just like giving away chips and spewing off chips to see where you're at. If you're not sure if you have the best hand, lots of times we can check for pot control, and our opponent's going to tell us where they're at if they're in position, right? If they check back, they typically have a weaker hand. If they bet, they typically have a stronger hand, or they're bluffing. And if we look at other information on them that we may have, if we played with them in the past, or if we have HUD stats on them, then we can use that in conjunction to tell us where we're at in the hand. So when we talk about these different reasons, I'm betting my hand, I'm pretty sure I have the best hand, I'm betting to see where I'm at, I'm betting for information, I'm betting so I don't get sucked out on, they really aren't fully fleshed out. Like, some of them make somewhat sense because they somewhat align with value betting, semi-bluffing, getting your opponent to fold their equity share, betting for protection, but they're not fully fleshed out. And then just some of them just don't make that much sense, such as betting for information as a pro bet. In 2017, a lot of good players just aren't going to be betting for information because, again, they're just going to use the skills that they've ingrained up in their head over the years through modern poker theory to understand where they're at based upon range analysis, board textures, player tendencies, HUD stats, all that information to tell them where they're at. So those are the reasons that I think aren't valid reasons for betting in poker. Well, guys, that's going to conclude today's lecture on reasons to bet in poker, and I know that we covered a lot. So I said there's only 2 primary reasons to bet in poker, but there's a lot that goes into it. So when we talk about value betting and bluffing/semi-bluffing, I want you to always think about the criteria that goes into making a good value bet versus a bad value bet, and a good semi-bluff/bluff or a bad semi-bluff/bluff, and think about secondary reasons, and when you're looking to bet, if your secondary reason actually makes sense or not in terms of what I discussed today. So if you guys liked today's video, as usual, please give it a thumbs up. If you guys haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, if you're new to the YouTube channel, please hit that subscribe button down there. If you know anybody that might value from my channel, tell them about them, let them know, and have them subscribe. So friends, family members, fellow poker players, let them know. And also, if you guys like all these free videos I put out on YouTube, please consider checking out my Patreon page down in the description, because you guys can help support and keep this channel going for as little as $1 per month. So anything that you can do, anything that you can help to support this channel helps me to continue to provide videos on a regular basis, because it takes time, money, effort, and all that stuff that goes into making these videos. Now, one last thing before you guys go. If you guys have not enrolled into my free 6 Steps to Profitable Poker course, check the link down below, because it includes a free copy of my Poker Fundamentals ebook. So check that out. If you want to get a free copy of that book, if you want to sign up for that course, 100% free for you guys. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys at the next video. Take care.